going. Okay, so we're talking about strategies for accelerating growth. But before we get to that, I want you to kind of set the tone about the beverage industry itself, because we've heard so many stories about, people are drinking less, right? GLP-1 drugs, or maybe the Surgeon General warnings. Where do you see the industry headed? How would you describe it?
Well, I mean, the good news is this is what I get to do every day, is think about and understand these things. So I'm excited to get the chance to talk to you guys about it. I mean, despite what was a really noisy year last year in the industry, we ended the year about the same as we did before. So there's, systematic things associated with things like calendar changes and holiday changes, and those things kind of move around. But there's a lot of other things that are happening around it. And you mentioned one of them with GLP-1, and it's certainly be naive to say, oh, that has no impact, because certainly we know that has an impact on consumers. But I think something really powerful to sink our teeth into, if you look across generations from Boomer to Gen X to Gen Z to Millennial, about the same amount of them are drinking. It's about 60%. And that's the same generation to generation. If you look at what's different, it's occasions. And when you think about occasions, what that's saying is, I got a lot of choices. There's a lot of things in my mind. There's a lot of things I can pick, and there's a lot of things driving my choices. And so in those moments where they have the opportunity, do they pick up our products as much? And so as you think about our ambition to be a beverage company, and you think about what needs we're trying to meet for consumers, that's our primary ambition, is to show up with something relevant, whether it's an innovation, whether it's a core beer brand, whether it's something new like a Fever Tree that's new to our portfolio, that meets the needs in those occasions. So that's the big opportunity.
And are you getting into non-alcoholic a little bit more? Do you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we've certainly seen that grow for the last few years, and that's absolutely part of the consumer choice. And so some of our big brands now have non-alc versions. And then when we think beyond just core beer with non-alc, there's things like non-alc adjacent, where a Fever Tree fits in, primarily a mixer, but a non-alc drink as well. And then things that are further away with energy drinks with ZOA.
Energy drinks, right? I forgot about that whole portion for you. Okay, so you lead the America's Commercial Accelerator. You say that's key to the business in Americas. So how so?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we are really excited about is we get to say things like we lead the strategic growth of the business. And what that means, I mean, it starts with that occasion piece that I talked about. But what it means is we look across all the capabilities that support our marketing and sales teams in a way that says, how are we thinking forward? And for us, that thinking forward is centered really in this idea about category first. It means category first means that, our job is to think about, how do I be the best strategic partner with my retail customer? How do I think about making it really easy for a distributor to get the products on shelf? And how do I think differently about engaging with a drinker today and the drinker of the future? Because a lot of things are changing, so I have to think about how to evolve to meet those needs.
Okay, so dig more into this. So how are you accomplishing this?
From a consumer standpoint, or just the broader approach?
The broader approach.
Well, when you think about it, I mentioned three big buckets. So the idea of being category first, I think, is a real differentiating factor in our industry, right? There's certainly, a bunch of different ways to approach it. But in our mind, if we can lead for the category first, then that helps grow the overall size of the business. It helps us along the way as well. So think about it from a retailer perspective. Our job is to be the best strategic partner for our retail customers. We have a proprietary category management framework, and I won't talk about all the details of it here, but if you think about the core of that, it's that same idea of occasions. I just mentioned it a second ago. I mean, some people would have you believe that a consumer shows up to a grocery store or convenience store and they just buy the easiest thing, or the first thing they see. And our argument is actually they show up with a whole lot of purpose. Who am I going to be with? What are we going to do? What is the most relevant thing for me in this moment? And if I look for those relevant things in that moment, then I'm looking for a certain set of things. And that connection to occasion translates all the way down to how you think about innovation. We have a strong history of innovation with really strong innovation brands, but we haven't always made those as relevant as possible in the channel. So if you think about how that shows up differently for like a convenience store channel, where singles or flavor are really ruling the growth for convenience. Are we finding a way to intersect what a consumer wants with what the channel needs and show up with the right products in those moments? So this year we'll have a big lean in with innovation for the C-store channel, which is a big opportunity of growth for us.
Now, you mentioned convenience stores. So is that a big portion of your business? correct?
Yeah, I mean, convenience stores is the biggest channel in beer for sure. And the challenge with convenience stores is it's just so different from the landscape of the retailer makeup, independent, mom and pop, localized retailers and then big chain retailers. So for us, when we think about a channel like convenience, I mentioned innovation. So it's making sure that what you're producing really shows up and meets the needs of the shoppers in those moments. But you're also talking about new and different ways to reach a shopper. So we're not long, hasn't been long for us to say something like pre-shop. Pre-shop used to be about like, do I have the right out-of-home really close to a convenience store? So when you're driving to go get gas, you see an out-of-home board, and you're like, oh, that's what I want. But think about the age of technology and integration in consumers and shoppers' lives. I mean, now pre-shop is reaching them on their couch when they're thinking about leaving, or reaching them in a moment where they are having an impulse buy or buying something else and you want to add beer to that moment. And so we call that sort of the moments that matter, and those are different by channel. How do you show up to be the most relevant in all those opportunities to influence, and that helps you connect in that occasion front.
So we talked about the retailers, convenience stores. Now, what about the consumer? How does this category, first approach help with the consumer?
Yeah, we already heard Gen Z, I think, from the stage already. I mean, the conversation about Gen Z is an interesting one. I started this by saying one of the great foundational things for us, that's something we really anchor to, is that they're still engaging in the category at the same rate. The difference is in how to reach them, both, how connected they are, the moments of technology and how you can find those connections, but also understanding deeply who they are and what motivates them. So this, over the past several years, we've participated in sort of landmark studies to really understand needs, what consumers are after and what they're looking for. But we've extended that beyond. In the past, we would have talked about things like just understanding, and then we try to turn it into action. Now we want to understand and learn from them along the way. So how do we take that engagement with them and continue it so that when you learn something from them, you can also re-engage with them on how to think about packaging or a new liquid or a new product that's really new and emerging, and that you just want to understand what they think of it. So we've extended our insights with Gen Z from understanding into how do we work with them to activate.
Now, what do they want? I mean, what are they looking for?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a ton of interesting differences generation to generation in terms of, what motivates people. And I don't know that it's so different from this generation to the millennial generation. We've seen a lot of changes over time. I think what you learn is that it's just about being more specific in how you find the ways to engage with them and what you think is available to them. So one of the things beyond things like GLP-1 is just the availability of alternatives. We talked about core beer. We talked about non-alc, which is a big emerging space. Sure. You're also talking about things like functional beverages and ready-to-drink spirits-based beverages. So there's just lots of things out there. And so I think understanding how to make that connection with them and find ways to do it in a really authentic way. But beyond that, I think they care about a lot of things we all care about, looking for value. Value takes on a different definition now, though. I mean, value once upon a time might have just been the price on the shelf, but value now might be how I feel like the packet or how I feel like the product resonates with me. Does it speak to me? Does it speak to a value that I share? Does it offer value in some other way? Like it feels aspirational, feels more premium, feels like something I'd like to hold in my hand. And so I think a lot of those things are similar. It's the nuance of how they show up for sure.
Now, I wanted to talk about tariffs for a bit, because we had a question from the audience. It says, how should we evaluate the supply chain's resilience given the possibility of new tariffs? It seems like it's been stabilizing post-COVID, but should we prepare for another major disruption? So how are you looking at tariffs when it comes to Molson Coors?
Yeah, I mean, you think about it obviously we're like any other company. We're evaluating this in real time and staying as close as we can to it. We have generational history in both the U.S. and Canada. When you think about our business overall. And so, I mean, I would point to what we've said before, which is that if you think across our businesses in the U.S. and Canada, generally where we brew beer, we source the materials from and brew in those countries. And so our exposure is certainly, more limited overall, but it's something we have to stay close on because it's ever evolving.
Yeah, and speaking of ever evolving, I mean, 2 centuries of brewing, that's a long time.
Yeah.
So how have things, changed most recently as far as the company? What are you looking ahead to, or what are you seeing? What are you excited about coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, we've been talking in this conversation about just the need to be flexible and evolving and engage with consumers where they are. We talk about our ambition is to be category first, really lead for driving the growth in the category. And that first way we talk about doing it is thinking about understanding the drinkers of today, but the drinkers of tomorrow. So we're obsessed, we're drinker obsessed. We're trying to understand what are the motivations, what are the things that are different, and what are the best ways to connect. And this landscape is evolving. It's evolving quickly. But that's why we think about our strategy to be a beverage company, to be a company that thinks about meeting the needs of consumers in any of those spaces where they are and finding the right thing to do it, whether it's evolving our programming of our core brands so that it feels like it really resonates and connects, or whether it's building new to the world innovation. We just launched a new to the world innovation that's bubble free. So it meets a functional need for a consumer. Yeah. So it feels like a refresher. So it meets a functional need for a consumer, but it also feels, like something that's on trend for that consumer as well. So that's the big opportunity for us, I think, is finding a way to evolve there.
Now, how do you evolve with that? You spoke about this before, the different generations. So if I'm sitting at a bar and I'm having a Blue Moon, but then someone else is having a different one, how do you connect those generations so that everyone is kind of along the same pace or, wanting the same thing? How do you connect the generations?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the risk of being charged for every time I say occasions, I'm going to just say it one more time. But think about what an occasion is, right? Yeah, it's right. It's all those moments where you think, who am I with? What are we doing? So I'm meeting with family, and there's generations of family there. Or I'm having a social occasion with people I don't necessarily know as well. The commonality is you're all there and you're there together. The difference is of what you find appropriate and for that moment. And so any of those things can have an impact, but we think what we're trying to do is find the understanding in the insights that surround those moments and then bring the products into that, so that the reality is if you're in that social occasion together with family, then that might mean something very specific for what you want, but it might mean something different for someone else. So it's really that understanding. And I think the difference is when you look across the occasions is the broad scope of occasions stays pretty close to the same. I mean, generally they're doing the same kind of things, relaxing at home and unwinding, or going to a big celebration. The kind of products they chose is different, but the underlying sentiment is the same. And so if it's beyond just like thinking about the insights, I mean, it goes all the way down to, how you reach them on the path to purchase, which we talked about with convenience, how you think about how to optimize how you reach them with media. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of layers to it, and there's a complexity that can feel like daunting, but there's a complexity that can feel like a big opportunity, which is just how are we as relevant as possible for them, and how does that move the category?
Now, what advice do you have for companies? Because you started this category, first idea. So for companies who are looking for that next idea, for their company, what advice do you have for them as far as, how did you come up with this, this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, we've been on the category first mantra for a while, and so I think we're, certainly uniquely positioned for where we are as a business to be leaning in that way, because just the inherent differences that happen within beer. But I think maybe the advice is think more broadly about the capability discussion. So, I mean, capability can take on supply chain capabilities. That's a big part of our conversation every single day. Capabilities can be commercial capabilities. It can be digital capabilities. It can be category management or analytics. You guys already talked a little bit about AI. And so analytics plays a really big role in the capabilities for any organization. And so be open to thinking about the capability conversation beyond just what happens maybe in some of the supply chain components, how it layers into commercial, and then where you're thinking about meeting the needs of the stakeholders in your value chain. So for us, that's because of the complexities of beer distributors, consumers, and our retail customers as well.
And do you find like technology kind of changing the way you do business as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, across all of those things. I mean, I think from, like we talked about already, the way you reach people, but also the way you provide efficiency to a distributor, that is out there driving your products to shelf every day. How do we make their job really easy? And technology has a big role to play in that, especially in the interaction of us with them through retailers. How do I make it really easy for you to show up, deliver on the expectations of the customer, and provide better service?